Hi, in this video I want to talk about encapsulation and something called PDUs, protocol data units. So previously we said that data isn't sent all as one big chunk from the transmitter to the receiver. It's broken up into these little segments. And each segment is actually encapsulated in multiple protocols. We talked about that with protocol in the protocols video. Each protocol has a specific purpose, and we'll talk about each one of those protocols later in this course. But let's take a look here. Here we have some data that's going to be sent from the server to a client. Okay, so this data here happens to be encapsulated in an application header called HTTP. Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Now, by the way, not all data that is sent from the web server using HTTP actually uses an HTTP header. We'll talk about that later. So you don't always see the application header is what I'm saying. But in this case, I'm showing the application header along with some data that's being sent. Okay. By the way, we call that protocol data unit just data. So what do we call all of this? The application header and the data, or the data. We call that just data. Sometimes we call it a stream. Okay, this gets encapsulated in the next layer. Remember from the OSI model or TCP/IP model, but the next layer protocol going down the stack called, in this case, a TCP header. This is actually a transport header. Okay, we'll learn more about what this transport header does later, but HTTP actually uses TCP as its transport protocol. All of this from the TCP header, the transport header, and the data, we call that protocol data unit a segment. Okay. Next, going down the protocol stack, it gets encapsulated in a network layer header using the OSI model, layer 3. This is known as a packet. Okay? So all of this, the IP header to all the way with the other headers and the original data, we call this PDU a packet. And this is really where TCP/IP leaves off as far as its layers and encapsulation. Okay. Next, what happens is that this packet needs to be transmitted over some sort of physical link or data link. Okay. In this case, it's going to be transmitted by the network interface card, a Ethernet network interface card over an Ethernet network. Okay. So it gets encapsulated in both a header and a trailer. So data link layer, we call this a frame, usually includes both the header and a trailer. In this case, we're going to be using Ethernet, although it doesn't say that here, to encapsulate our IP packet. Now, we'll talk more about this here in a moment, but this header is only good for NIC card to NIC card communications on the same network. That will make more sense to you as we go through these videos and as I talk more about it in class. All right, then all of this gets transmitted into bits and sent by the network interface card out its interface to typically an Ethernet switch. Yep. We look at the opposite here. When the client computer receives this, it's actually going to receive the bits, okay, in the network interface card. Then the network interface card looks at these bits, and we're going to be talking more about what each one of these are a little later. But it looks at this data link frame, this Ethernet frame, and it will de-encapsulate or decapsulate it as it moves up the stack. So it checks certain things. We'll look at this later. It makes sure that the information, the data link header, refers to itself, then removes it, passes that information up to the IP process. The IP process looks at the information in the IP header, looks at certain information, makes sure it's IP address, for example. And if all that looks good, it hands it up to, in this case, the TCP process. So you can see we're removing headers as it moves up the stack. The TCP process in the client takes a look at the information in the TCP header, and everything looks good. It hands it up to, in this case, the HTTP application, which then hands it off to the browser. Okay, so decapsulation is the process of removing control information, removing those headers as it passes up through the protocol stack. Okay. Well, I hope that explained a little bit about encapsulation and PDUs. We'll be talking a lot more about this as we go through each of the different layers and looking at different protocols.